I've done these comparative type of videos before with mice and guinea pigs, but never before with different species of hamsters. And something that I'm often asked about is there a difference between dwarf and Syrian hamster care? Well, to start, let's go over the 5 domesticated species of hamsters. So we have the Syrian hamster, Chinese hamster, winter white, Campbell's, and Roborovsky hamster. The Syrian hamster is the largest domesticated species out of the 5. The Chinese hamster technically is the only real dwarf hamster out of the bunch, but because the winter white, Campbell's, and Roborovsky hamster are all smaller than the Syrian hamster, that is why we tend to group them and call them dwarf hamsters. Chinese hamsters share kind of similar traits to both Syrian hamsters and dwarf hamsters. For example, they have really long bodies, more similar so to a Syrian hamster. So for wheel recommendations, a Chinese hamster would fit in with Syrian hamsters. But a Chinese hamster also is still small, like a dwarf hamster, so they would also still fit in with recommendations for dwarf-sized hideouts. Winter whites and Campbell's dwarfs are the only 2 species that can interbreed with each other because they both carry the same number of chromosomes. They also look very similar to each other, so unfortunately a majority of these species are indeed hybrids, unless you've gotten your dwarf hamster from an ethical breeder who can show you the lineage of your hamster and can say this is 100% a purebred winter white or purebred Campbell's. You most likely have a hybrid dwarf. I say unfortunately because hybrids are more prone to health issues and, well, they just shouldn't exist realistically, but they do. They exist and they are capable of living long, healthy lives, but like I mentioned, they are going to be more prone to health issues because those 2 species were just never meant to interbreed with each other. And the Roborovsky is our smallest domesticated species. So for the sake of the video, I will be lumping in all of the dwarf hamsters together unless I specifically say their species. Now, for the most part, basic hamster care is the same for all of the species and applies to all of the species. They all require the same enrichment and have the same needs with just very small differences. Now, obviously a big difference is their sizing, but you're most likely already aware of that, so I'm not going to be discussing that in today's video because I've discussed it in past videos. So let's start off by looking at where they come from. Syrian hamsters are from Turkey and Syria, whereas dwarf hamsters, on the other hand, mainly come from Asia in places such as China, Korea, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Russia. These environmental differences are what make the slight differences in the hamsters. Dwarf hamsters, especially the robo in particular, would occur in semi-desert and desert habitats, whereas the Syrian hamster is mainly found in agricultural fields. So this means a dwarf hamster may prefer a larger area of sand in their enclosure than a Syrian may. But, of course, this is just a general rule and doesn't necessarily mean that your Syrian hamster wouldn't enjoy having a large sand bath to dig in. Always observe your hamster and adjust their enclosure based on their behaviors. The next difference between the 2 is their feet. The Syrian and Chinese hamster both have hairless paw pads, whereas the winter white, Campbell's, and Roborovsky hamsters all have furry feet, and this has been said to help protect their feet from their environment. Because of this, climbing is a little bit more difficult than it would be for the Syrian and Chinese hamster. So keeping accessories lower to the ground and not as high up, and also avoiding any really smooth items that they may need to climb up, would make their enclosures better suited for them. Another physical difference between them is their scent glands. Syrian hamsters have 2 scent glands located on each side of their hips. They're more prominent in males than females, and they can often look like brown moles with bald patches, or these areas might even look a bit greasy, and these can often be confused for tumors, but they're in fact not. This is also why you may commonly see your Syrian hamster going around either their cages or playpens and rubbing up against things aggressively because they're scent marking with them. Now for winter whites, Campbell's and Roborowski hamsters, they have one singular scent gland located on the underside of their belly, sort of where you would probably imagine where their belly button would be if they had one. It may be harder to see because it is underneath them, and oftentimes fur ends up covering it, but sometimes they can have a greasy yellow secretion. The way that they actually use this gland if they want to mark their territory is by making an impression with the secretions from the gland. Unlike Syrian hamster scent glands, it is really important that you are keeping an eye on this scent gland because in dwarf hamsters, it is possible for this scent gland to become infected. Any sign of increased size, discharge, bleeding, or redness should be brought up to your local exotic vet. And what about the Chinese hamster? Well, this is something I actually had to bring up to my good friend and the owner of thehemingway.com to help me research. After owning a Chinese hamster myself, I had noticed that Waddles, my past Chinese hamster, had scent glands on both sides of his hips. But when I went to go do research on Chinese hamster scent glands, I found no evidence of Chinese hamsters having scent glands on their hips, and everyone just lumped them in with dwarf hamsters having it on their stomach. But I also could not find a single photo anywhere of a Chinese hamster scent gland, not either on their hips or on their belly. So the Hemingway actually let me know that she discovered that Chinese hamsters both have scent glands on their hips and one on their belly. It's not super clear as to which gland they might use more than another or why they even have this many scent glands, but it is good to know in case you ever do come across them and you're concerned as to what that is. It's probably their scent gland. Then we have diet. Living in these different environments would mean that their diets would slightly differ. And this is actually why a lot of European countries offer a dwarf hamster seed mix and a Syrian hamster seed mix, because they would eat slightly different things. Syrian hamsters in the wild normally would hoard larger grains such as wheat, barley, legumes such as chickpeas and lentils, and other vegetables, and of course, insects. This is because these would be the fields they typically would live in. Dwarf hamsters, on the other hand, would have a much wider selection of smaller seeds, grasses, and insects in their habitats. It's also been found that the Campbell's dwarf and Chinese hamster have a predisposition to develop diabetes. This is also why, if you're not 100% sure if your dwarf hamster is a hybrid or not, that you take the safe assumption and treat them as diabetes prone. This means for these species, you should be more mindful of the diets you're feeding them. Now, of course, high fat or sugary foods once in a blue moon may not cause harm, but generally should be avoided to be on the safe side. If you believe that your hamster has developed diabetes, you may notice signs of increased drinking, frequent urination, which also may have a sweeter smell to it, as well as sudden weight loss or weight gain. If you notice any of these signs, please talk to your local exotic vet for further diagnosis and treatment. And that sums up the biggest differences between dwarf hamsters and Syrian hamsters. As you can see, they do require the same care, they just have their own unique differences that may require small changes to their cages and diet. So with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. Let me know down below which species do you own, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!